So you've been thinking about maybe starting your own podcast, but every time you do, you fall into this overwhelm. It's like, do I focus on editing, equipment, tech, tools? Where do I begin? I'll walk you through exactly how to start a podcast. And it's 2025, so we're going to use all of the best tools that are available to us today. And everything I'm teaching you here, from idea to launching, this is what I teach the students in my podcasting accelerator. And you might be someone who has had a podcast in their heart for years, but you just haven't known how to bring all the pieces together in order to actually make your podcast a reality. Or you might be someone who's made an episode and you're just not sure where to go next. Either way, you're gonna get a lot of clarity after this. My name's Hiwote. I'm a podcast producer and the creator of the Emerging Voices Podcasting Accelerator. And my job is to help you create a podcast that only you could make. And if you're wondering who I am and why you should trust me, here are some of the shows that I've worked on, including the New York Times' Together Apart and Esther Perel's Where Should We Begin? And my favorite show that I've ever made is This Is Dating, which is a podcast that Time Magazine listed as one of the best podcasts of 2022. Okay, let's get you started. Step one is to clarify your podcast idea. So the best podcasts live at the intersection of what you are incredibly passionate and care about. So these are things that involve your lived experience, your expertise, the subjects that you can talk about forever. And then also what your listeners are struggling with or looking for solutions to. The convergence of those two ideas is where meaningful podcasts are made. Now, if you're telling me you want to make a podcast about your relationship to your plants, I'm not mad at that. But you can't then be upset that not enough people are downloading your podcast. People download and listen to shows that are useful for them. And useful can mean lots of different things. Maybe it's entertaining, maybe it's funny, maybe it gets at an emotion that they've really been struggling with and helps them resolve it. So your job is to make sure that you create a podcast that actually resonates with people if you're trying to make a show that is gonna get downloaded ultimately, right? Now, here is usually where people say, okay, but I don't know the name for my show. I know the idea, but I don't know the name. And we have a whole video on how to name a podcast. So go and watch that. But ultimately, I don't want you to get stuck at this step. If you don't know what to name it, you can come up with a placeholder name and then keep working through the other steps. And then you can eventually either rebrand or come back and re-record the line where you say the name of your show, but don't get stuck or overwhelmed thinking about the name of your show. Your name ultimately needs to reflect the content and actually be searchable by your listeners. Those are the biggest things to keep in mind. Step two is to write a script or a script outline. And I say this because before we talk about gear and software to use to record, we need to make sure that the actual content of what you're talking about has real value. Whether it's a solo episode, an interview-based podcast, or a narrative show, you will always want your episode to have a strong hook, a clear introduction to what your show is about, a compelling journey that you're going to take your listener on, and then an ending that leaves your listener feeling different than when they came to your show, okay? So whether that's if they were depressed when they first came, they feel a little bit lighter when they leave, that is a compelling journey and a good ending. Or maybe it's that they've been really confused as to how to solve a very specific problem. Your episode, if it takes them to a place that's different than where they started, you can consider that a successful outline or a successful script written. And if you haven't seen our video on how to write a good script, I highly recommend that. It's a detailed guide on exactly how to write your first script. Also, we have a video on how to ask really good questions, because really asking good questions goes into how you structure your episode. If you are doing a solo podcast, you will still want to know how to ask good questions, because your job as a solo podcaster is to answer some of the questions that either came up for you or that you think your audience has for you. And even that should be taking people on a journey instead of it feeling random. Part of why, honestly, is because if I'm listening to a podcast, think about this in your own life. If you're listening to a podcast where you could just stop at any time and not really come back and listen to it because it's all over the place, you likely won't finish that episode. But the kinds of shows, the episodes like This Is American Life, which has a really high finish rate for all of their episodes, it's because they have a compelling journey that they're taking you on in every single episode. So the more compelling the journey is, the more likely your listeners are going to stay hooked to you and your episode throughout every single episode that you share with them. Now, step 3 is to record the episode. And this tends to be where most of my students panic a bit, and people who I know who are not my students tend to get overwhelmed at this stage. And I'm here to tell you it's simple. The solution is simple, okay? You're gonna record using a microphone like the Blue Yeti Nano, which is what I use. That's what you're listening to right now. It's what I've used on many of the shows that I've worked on. Or if you have the budget to use something like the Shure SM7B, sure, get that. Sure, get it? Sure, get that. But I don't want you overthinking the tech and using that as a tool for procrastination. We want you to have good audio. We don't need you to get Celine Dion's microphone, okay? It's not that deep, all right? We just need you to have good enough audio so that you can create a minimally viable product. And I'm telling you this because I know how tempting it can be to say, I have to get the best of everything before I ever begin. That's really not how we play this game. You are in it for the long haul, which means you have lots of time to improve and optimize as you go. You have to first get started, and then you can get good, and then you can optimize, okay? That's how we're gonna start thinking about this. To record, you can use SquadCast or Riverside for remote interviews. And if you're making a solo podcast, you can use either of those. Or if you're already using Descript, which is the editing tool we'll talk about in a second, you can just record your solo episodes directly into Descript. So let me show you what that looks like from my end, okay? Because I'm using exactly these tools for this recording. Here is my Blue Yeti Nano, and over here, we're recording in Descript. This is basically what it looks like to record a solo episode in Descript. The goal here is not perfection. We are looking for you to make a minimally viable episode that proves to you that you can do this and you can get better. You might be asking, all right, should I be recording my video and making this into a video podcast? Because that's what all of my favorite podcasters do. I don't know if it's controversial, but I'm going to tell you what I think, and this is what I teach. I do not think that when you're beginning, you should be starting with a video podcast. Why? Because the complications that come with trying to integrate video and audio and learn to be a good storyteller and have the right tools is just too much, okay? We don't want to do that. We want you to start this, feel proud of yourself, and keep going, and then improve over time. Do I think you should have a video podcast? Absolutely. If the kind of podcast you're making allows for that, then yes, absolutely. But at the beginning is not when I would recommend you do it, okay? I actually think adding that level of complication is going to keep you from ever getting started. Oh, did I say it? I said it, and I meant it. Step 4 is to edit for clarity, not perfection. And we are going to use tools like Descript or even Riverside's built-in editor to edit our episodes because we're in 2025, yay! And we no longer have to try and edit using tools like GarageBand or Audacity. And I get it, they're completely free, but the cost that it's going to take on your noggin, on your mental health, I just don't think it's worth it. And here's why. Descript and Riverside allow you to edit using a transcript. So you don't have to edit by ear, okay? Versus GarageBand and Audacity, you're looking at WAV files and trying to cut the parts that you don't want. That's way harder to do than just removing text that you think is not helpful. Because they're AI powered, they even have options like remove all ums and ahs. Are you kidding me? I love that for you, okay? It just dramatically reduces the editing fear that a lot of people have. Now, the second question becomes, okay, so how do I edit so that my episode sounds really good past the ums and ahs? The goal we're trying to get to in editing is where you, as an editor or as the producer of your own show, you want to feel confident about what you cut and what you keep. The way you do that is first by removing any rambling. You want to remove any parts that are not interesting or engaging. So if you're interviewing someone, it might be tempting for you to keep everything they said because you don't want to cut them off too early. I certainly used to do this as a beginner podcaster. But the truth is, if you tightened what they said, if you cut out certain parts, it might make their answers more interesting and it might make them an even better interview guest than they actually were. So you editing your guest is a good thing and you should take the creative liberty to do that. You don't want to go overboard. You just want to make sure anything that is losing your attention or your engagement, you can cut out. Anything that is not serving your audience, you can cut out, okay? So when we were making Where Should We Begin, for example, it started as a 3-hour episode and we cut it down to a 45-minute episode. That's a lot of cutting, okay? But the more you get comfortable with cutting out parts that first existed in the raw version but are not going to exist for your listener, the better your podcast is going to be. Now, something that's optional but nice here is music. You can get music directly from Descript if you're using Descript to edit, or you can get it from a place like Epidemic Sound, which is what I use, and I'll drop a link to it below. Epidemic Sound gives you royalty-free music, and so does Descript, that you can use in your episodes in perpetuity, so you can use it forever. This is super important because you want to make sure that you are using royalty-free music only, so that someone doesn't come and tell you to take your episode down. All right? All right. Step 5 is to publish and distribute your podcast. Yay, we've made it. You are so close to the end once you get to this step. Before you can publish and distribute, you need podcast cover art because Spotify and Apple will require you to have that in order to distribute on their platforms, okay? So to make your cover art, you can use something like Canva. That's exactly what Alicia did in her cover art, which you can see right here. You can also use something like Fiverr or Upwork to hire someone to make your art for you. Once you have your podcast art, then you're ready to actually distribute it to the world. Now, to distribute a podcast, you need a podcast host, okay? I'm going to explain this to you really simply and we'll get to your options in a second. A podcast host is like the base where your podcast lives. This is its home. And then from there, it gets distributed to all of the platforms where people listen to podcasts. On Apple, on Spotify, on YouTube, on Amazon Music, everywhere. You don't have to upload it to Apple and to Spotify and to YouTube. You could just put it in the home and then send the signal that says, hey, Apple, Spotify, everybody, we have a new episode live. That signal is called an RSS feed, okay? So your RSS feed is you're going to get from your podcast hosting platform. That's the home for your podcast. So what kinds of options exist for this platform? Traditionally, we've used Buzzsprout and Libsyn and Captivate and Transistor and Podbean to host our podcasts. And those are still great options for hosting a podcast and then distributing it to Apple, Spotify, etc. But when you're first getting started, you want to keep your costs as low as possible in order to again, create that minimally viable product, and then if you decide you want to upgrade later, you can. So what I recommend to all of my students to host their podcasts on Substack. I know that sounds odd, but Substack, which we traditionally know it as a newsletter platform, now has a podcast hosting capacity. So there are all sorts of people like Lenny's newsletter, who is huge on Substack, and he hosts his podcast there. And Substack does the same thing all of these platforms do. So it gives you an RSS feed, which you can send to Apple, Spotify, etc. I will say Substack doesn't give you as much detail about who's listening in what part of the world and is it male, female, da da da. You don't get as much of those details. But when you're first starting, you don't need that. Part of why I love Substack is because it encourages you to already create a newsletter for your podcast, which I think is absolutely necessary. You want a space for your listeners to be able to communicate with you directly. So if you get people's email addresses subscribing to your podcast, that's so much more powerful than just getting someone to download your show, okay? Because it ensures that you can be in their email inbox every week or however often you want to be in their inbox. The second piece is because Substack is so beautifully designed, you already have a portfolio or a website for your podcast. You don't need to go out and create a website just for your podcast. Now, when I started, I didn't have this. Substack, I don't think existed, or if it did, it was very small and I didn't know anything about it. So I hosted my very first podcast, Depth and Candor, on Libsyn. And then I had to create a website on Squarespace. And my podcast episodes were uploaded to Libsyn, distributed to Apple and Spotify. And then I would need to create a new post on Squarespace and add the link. It was just too much, okay? So we want to simplify your workflow. If you upload to Substack, it just simplifies your process dramatically, because from there you can automatically send an email and people can just come to your Substack and they'll see a list of all of your episodes. Plus, if they never want to come to your Substack, they can just listen to you on Apple or Spotify or wherever else. So those are the 5 essential steps of starting a podcast in 2025. First, clarify your podcast idea. Second, write your script outline or the actual script along with good questions. Third, record simply. Fourth, edit for clarity. And fifth, publish and distribute. Now, if you've heard all this and you're wondering, okay, I want to learn more, the Emerging Voices Accelerator is where we go super deep into every single one of these steps, and you have my full support in creating your exact podcast. If you want to learn more, you can book a free 20-minute call with me. I will see you in the next video.